Stand Up.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 1094 of Stand Up, where I welcome MSNBC anchor and author of an excellent new memoir. It's called Small Acts of Courage. My friend Ali Velshi and I join together in great conversation today. I learned so much from him every time I talk to him. He is like a teacher and a friend all rolled up into one. You will love our conversation. It starts at about 23 minutes into today's show after a great news update. But hey, if you didn't listen to yesterday's show with Austin Frerick, who has written a new book called Barron's Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry, you gotta go back and listen to that. I mean, you don't have to press stop right now and go back and listen to that, especially if you already did. Then you don't have to listen to it again. But if you didn't, man, the feedback was amazing, and I can't thank you enough. Link Addis in Iowa suggesting Austin Frerick on the show. Great guest. Listen and share it with everybody you know. So informative. But today I've got Velshi, and of course, as always, I've got your news roundup coming at you. Just a reminder, I will be hosting a hangout tomorrow night at 8 p.m. I'm looking forward to seeing you. We didn't do it last week. We're always active in the Discord platform. If you don't know how to get there, let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'll walk you right through it if you're having problems. And if you're not already a subscriber, sign up now. This is an independent podcast. It's ad-free. I cannot do it without you, so sign up now. Thank you very much to Amy Broadband, who either resubscribed or added a subscription. Great to hear from you, Amy. Thank you so much for your generous subscription. And hello to Danielle Wiener, who has just become a new subscriber, I think. Very grateful to both of you and anybody else. I don't always give the shout-outs. I'm not the most organized about every part of this, seeing as that I book, host, produce, edit, and post a brand new, comprehensive, multifaceted podcast every day, including often Saturdays. Some things slip through the cracks, my friends. But thank you so much for your subscription. And for those of you who have upgraded and paid more, every dollar counts. I really appreciate it. I'm considering investing in a stand-up fan. So I can't thank you enough. It's going to be real nice come the hot weather. All right, let's get to those headlines, shall we? Lots to talk about in the last 24, coming at you from Earth One. That's what I like to say. I hear Nicole Wallace and a lot of other people using that phrase as well. Some of you, I think, heard it first from me, and give me credit. I am not the first one to use it. I'm glad a lot of people in media and culture are using Earth One, and I describe it, generally speaking, as those of us who believe in man-made climate change, that vaccines are a public health miracle. You know, man landed on the moon, Joe Biden won the election. That's Earth One. We can disagree about all of it, but not, well, provable reality. All right, here's what happened yesterday. According to me and my news-gathering prowess and process, yesterday was 1197 of the Biden administration. There are 187 days until Election Day, November 5th, 2024. What are you doing to make it better, both locally, at the state level, and obviously at the national level? To save democracy, we are the ones we've been waiting for, and here is day 1197 of the Biden administration, where the disgraced former president was held in contempt of court and fined $9,000 for repeatedly violating a gag order. House Democrats said they'd block the crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene's effort to remove Speaker Mike Johnson. Universities across the country called on campus, city, and state police officers to quell civil disobedience by students protesting the U.S.-backed Israeli military offensive in Gaza. The Biden administration will ease federal restrictions on cannabis, and again, the disgraced former president refused to commit to vetoing a national ban that he said he'd absolutely consider pardoning the hundreds of criminals convicted in connection with the attack on U.S. Capitol. And he refused to rule out the possibility of a political violence following the presidential election. A lot of those revelations come in a print interview, so it's not quite as impactful in Time magazine, which is definitely not as impactful, but still remarkable admissions or lack of admissions in that interview, and a lot of people were talking about that yesterday. But yeah, let me go a little bit deeper. The Justice Department planning to encourage the White House to lessen the federal restrictions on marijuana, according to 3 people familiar with the matter and reporting. If the move is approved, it would kick off a lengthy rulemaking process that could significantly shift how the government views the safety and use of the drug for medical purposes. It could also lead to the softening of sentencing guidelines and banking restrictions surrounding its use or possession, and this is about 130 years too late, but we will take it. We've been in the fight for this one for a real long time. Now, just revisiting the campus protests quickly, the reporting from earlier yesterday was that early on Tuesday, dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters stormed into an academic building in a Columbia University in New York City campus and used furniture to barricade themselves inside. They smashed windows, they unfurled banners, and created a makeshift system to deliver food to demonstrators who, as of last night, were still remaining inside. During the afternoon, university officials announced that students involved in the building's occupation would face expulsion from school. They're going to get kicked out of Columbia. Imagine getting into Columbia, paying for Columbia, and then getting kicked out for any reason, including a principled protest, if that's what this is, if these are actually students there. Columbia University closed the entire Manhattan campus to everyone except students who live in dorms there and employees who provide essential services. The arrests of protesters there about 2 weeks ago helped set off this cascade of campus activism. And late last night, nearly 100 people were arrested at Columbia University by NYPD officers who cleared the Hamilton Hall, it's called, which had been taken over, and the tent encampment the students established to protest the war in Gaza. Officers descended onto Columbia University campus about 9 p.m., declared the campus clear just before 11 p.m. Special police units entered the Hamilton Hall through a second-story window using a massive truck, a ramp. About 40 people were arrested in the building's first floor. The university has asked NYPD to maintain a presence on campus through at least May 17th, 2 days after the scheduled graduation. Columbia and Barnard students were urged by school officials to shelter in place. And before Columbia called NYPD's assistance, law enforcement officials said they believed the protests have been taken over by outside agitators. So it's not completely clear what's happening there, and there are some good reporters on the scene, but it's still, I think, pretty confusing. That's the latest from Columbia University. Officials at Portland State University closed the campus after students broke into its library, and police officers made new arrests at universities in Virginia, North Carolina, and elsewhere. More than 1,000 people have been detained on American campuses since April 18th. And in some areas, there were signs that the disruption might be waning. Police officers managed to end the 8-day occupation of an administration building at California State Polytechnic University in Humboldt, California. Encampments at Yale and the University of Pittsburgh also appeared to have been vacated. So that is the latest on those campus protests. And what else do I have here for you? Well, speaking of the Middle East, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to invade Rafah, Gaza's southernmost city, quote, with or without a deal. Climate news. The White House released new rules designed to speed up clean energy permits while requiring agencies to weigh the climate impact of new projects, which is important. And the administration should be given credit for yet another advancement. Breast cancer screening is now going to start at age 40, according to an expert panel, reversing longstanding guidance that most women wait until 50. I'll have to talk with Aaron Carroll about that. The evil billionaire Elon Musk gutted the Tesla team responsible for building charging stations for electric vehicles, sowing uncertainty about the future of the company's charging network, which we were led to believe was going to be proprietary and more important than the cars themselves, more profitable than the cars themselves, that they have the plugs, they have the network. Well, maybe not. The tech giant Meta is being investigated by the European Union regulators for the spread of election disinformation on Facebook and Instagram. RFK Jr.'s awful campaign for president has now said that he will be on the ballot in California, which shouldn't matter too much to Joe Biden there, I hope. There's probably a lot of anti-vaxxers in California. And I mentioned that emergency slide that fell off the Boeing plane, the Delta flight in New York. Well, it was recovered along a jetty in the water in Queens. That must have been a fun find. And finally, killer asteroid hunters discovered about 27,000 overlooked space rocks, according to the Asteroid Institute, University of Washington. A couple of years ago, this team of researchers dedicated to finding killer asteroids before they kill us came up with a neat trick. Instead of scanning the skies with telescopes for asteroids, the scientists wrote an algorithm that sifts through old pictures of the night sky, discovering about 100 asteroids that have been overlooked in those images. And yesterday, those scientists revealed the 27,000 newly identified solar system bodies. This is more than were discovered by all of the world's telescopes combined last year. And so that's a pretty interesting and important scientific discovery. Now we have to kill them all. All right. Well, those are your headlines. Let's get to some of the sound I've gathered for you from yesterday. First, whenever I see a Jasmine Crockett clip, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, I always want to share that with you. Here she is yesterday debunking the constant bullshit that the Biden administration has somehow weaponized government.
I recently was appointed to the Weaponization Subcommittee, And so I'm going to have plenty of long days ahead of me, kind of like what I have here on oversight. But the point of the weaponization committee was to have a conversation about the government being weaponized in a way so that people could somehow get some personal gain, because there's this theory that this administration has somehow weaponized the government. There is not this acknowledgement that the other guy just is a criminal, because that's just too hard to believe, even though he currently is sitting in New York facing criminal charges that were not brought by the federal government, but instead by state government. Nevertheless, so when I think about weaponization, I honestly can only think about Trump and his administration and all the work that he did to harm federal employees. So to be clear, Trump's 2020 executive order would have effectively gutted civil service job protections for workers across the federal government. Trump would have created politically charged firings of potentially thousands of federal workers and made these public servants subject to the whims of a political dictator and his posse rather than the adherents of the tenets of our Constitution. So let's be clear. Individuals pursuing public service do so largely because of their belief in government. I'm sure you can make a lot more money if you just decided to go elsewhere.
All right, there's Jasmine Crockett on the oversight hearing yesterday. I always love her comments and speeches at these hearings. And, I love so many of the Democrats who I think are so effective in their ability to communicate and articulate and passionately and often hilariously speak in such a way that I think is really convincing. And it's also not like namby-pamby, not weak, not inarticulate and too highbrow or academic. I love the way this crop of Democrats in Congress communicate. Here's another one. This is Jamie Raskin talking about something called Schedule F, which I'm learning is a pretty important issue to understand. Back in April, the Biden administration issued a new rule to protect federal workers from being fired just on a whim. The new rule would make it harder for the disgraced former president or any other president, future president, to reshape the federal workforce via mass firings, as a likely GOP presidential nominee has promised to do if he's elected to another term in the White House. The new rule is widely perceived, of course, as a response to the disgraced former president's attempt to reshape the federal workforce at the end of his term. It's so important that they protect these federal workers and prevent any future president from just being able to dismiss them and hire whatever gun-toting Christian nationalists he sees fit or she sees fit. So here's Jamie Raskin spelling it out, I think, pretty well for all of us and yesterday's oversight here.
Give another example. The gentlelady gave the example of what happened in Ukraine. I want to give a closer home example of what happened with Hurricane Dorian, when the scientists at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the National Weather Service, made predictions about where the hurricane was going to hit on the East Coast. And President Trump decided that the hurricane was really going to hit in Alabama. And that was just contradicted by the facts. And NOAA continued to put out notices to the public saying, no, that Alabama was not at serious risk for being a target, and it was going to be on the coast and much further south. And then Trump got very mad about that, and he got the Secretary of Commerce to go after them and so on. And this is really what we're talking about. Do you want the federal government filled with a bunch of political flunkies, hacks, and sycophants who will say whatever the president wants, or do you want professional scientists and civil servants who are going to follow facts and follow the law? The president's job is to take care that the law is faithfully executed, not that the law is disrupted and remade in his own royal image. And so if you want a government that is going to be letting Donald Trump and his Sharpie determine where the hurricane's going to hit, as opposed to scientists, then you would be for Schedule F. But we view Schedule F as a serious danger to the professional civil service that's been built up over the last several decades.
All right, there you go. Jamie Raskin on top of it yesterday. And now let's leave the oversight hearing and Capitol Hill and head into the studio at MSNBC, where yet another House Democrat, probably the most well-known and widely respected and even feared in some corners of Washington and around the world, it's Nancy Pelosi, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday, she was on MSNBC with Katie Tur. They had the minorest of dust-ups, but I'm here for it. I just love Nancy Pelosi running over Katie Tur in this moment. Former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was comparing the economic records, the jobs creation or loss records between the president, the current president, and the disgraced former president, and this is how it played out.
Nothing in his performance, if that's the word we'll use, what he has done, that would indicate that he cares, prioritizes, or ever valued or did anything to support a democracy. And now on the ballot saying he should have immunity from whatever he might do. I mean, really, I have sympathy and respect for everybody who votes. I'm just glad people vote. I know some of them will always reject those of us who may look different to them in leadership or the rest, and that's that. But there are those who have real legitimate concerns about immigration, globalization, innovation, and what does that mean for their job and their family's future? And we have to address those concerns. And Joe Biden is doing that, created 9 million jobs in his term in office. Donald Trump has the worst record of job loss of any president. So we just have to make sure people know.
That was a global pandemic.
He had the worst record of any president. We've had other concerns in our country. If you want to be an apologist for Donald Trump, that may be your role, but it ain't mine. And he has the worst.
That anybody can accuse me of that.
But let me just say, as a Speaker of the House, we put forth a $3 trillion bill. $3 trillion of investment in communities and the rest, and that stimulates the economy.
All right. So I thought that was really interesting, and certainly Nancy Pelosi has the upper hand, as she always does. And Katie Tur tries to push back and says, I don't think anybody could really accuse me of being a supporter of Trump's. Yeah, I had some weird issues with Katie Tur back in the day. She wasn't calling him a white supremacist when I was. Certainly she was shocked when I did it. And she was on the trail. And I think she, more than anybody, should have seen, as white as she is apparently, just how terrible he was and his supporters were. And when I called him a white supremacist to her face, she was terrified that she was caught on recording, like not pushing back at that. And I wish I could find that audio. So I'm not going to sit here and say she's terrible. I think she does a decent job, whatever, in that medium and corporate media. But Nancy Pelosi rolls right over her. And furthermore, and more importantly, I never got the pandemic argument. Someone was saying this on Twitter yesterday. But, you know, we elect leaders to lead no matter what is happening in the country and in the world and in and out of a crisis. And a crisis is a test for a leader. And if you fail it, you don't get a do-over. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty fair sentiment myself. And now let's head over to Earth 2, really Earth 2, because this is Newsmax with Eric Rawlings, what's his name? I know this guy because I worked with him at CNBC. He was a prick then. I busted his balls once in front of the audience, and he did not like it. Meanwhile, Dylan Ratigan and the whole rest of the rich white boy crew at CNBC were good sports. They could take it, but this guy could not take it. He was always a prick. And I feel bad that his son died of a heroin overdose. I would never wish suffering on anybody. But, yeah, he's still a dick. And, well, anyway, he had James Comer on his show, so it is Earth 2. And, I mean, this is unbelievable. I can't stop laughing at this. But Comer's new talking point, apparently, is that the reason why his impeachment investigation of the President Biden, has stalled is because there's too much evidence.
$64,000 question, Chairman. When do we hold them accountable for perjury or evading taxes?
A lot evading taxes, many financial crimes. The reason that this is taking so long, in addition to the obstruction for the White House, is there's more evidence that comes in every day.
More evidence is coming in every day? Apparently the reporting, by the way, the internal reporting is that James Comer himself is done with the impeachment. He thinks it is a big loser. He thinks that he looks like an idiot, and the entire thing has fallen apart in his face. It's real embarrassing. So interesting to find out if that really is how he feels. But he seems to have learned nothing, and he doesn't seem like a real smart guy. He really doesn't. I almost feel bad for him when he's up against Raskin or other smarty pants on the other side of the aisle, because he doesn't seem to have met a smart person or a smart woman or a smart black person at all in his life. Somehow somehow James Comer was the smartest person in the room. And I'm not sure if that was a room filled with cattle or just really dumb people, but that guy must have just kept falling face forward and somehow getting promoted to become this powerful member of Congress. And anyway, I could say more, but I think I've been talking for far too long. All right, that's all I've got for you, except for the jokes, baby. Just the jokes. Time for some comedy. I always try to end the news segment, which is usually serious and often depressing, with some laughs. And today they are brought to you by CBS, my old friend, your old friend, Stephen Colbert, on The Late Show.
Anyone at home keeping score, today was the start of week 2 of testimony in Donald Trump's hush money trial here in New York City. It is clearly taking a toll on the man. Here he is entering.
This is a picture of Trump exhaling, and his cheeks are filled up, puffed up.
Here he is entering the courthouse this morning with his cheeks full of acorns for later. Trump showed just as much stamina as last week. Reportedly, he was sitting with his eyes closed for significant portions of his testimony. So either he's falling asleep again or he's doing that little kid thing where he thinks if he can't see you, no one can see him. It's a real challenge for his lawyers, I got to tell you. Where I wonder where the former president is. I guess I'll have to eat all these cookies by myself. Oh, well, wait, I'm here. Of course, when Trump hasn't been asleep, he's been violating his gag order by posting messages attacking witnesses and prosecutors and jurors. So before testimony resumed today, Judge Merchan finally issued his ruling on those violations, fining Trump $9,000. Now, I know, $9,000 may not seem like a lot to a successful businessman, but what about to Trump? The judge lamented that is the most he could legally fine him, warning that if Trump keeps violating the gag order, jail may be a necessary punishment. I don't know if it's necessary for Trump, but I need it. Now, when the testimony resumed, we got a glimpse of Trump's, the legal team, their overall defense. And it's that Trump didn't have sex with any of the women who he paid off for silence. So he paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars so his wife wouldn't find out he didn't have an affair. Melania, honey, I know this is going to be hard for you to hear, but you're not the only woman I'm not having sex with.
Okay. There you go. Colbert does it again, as he always does. All right, well, let's get to my guest, Ali Velshi, shall we? Ali and I go way back. I met him in 2010 when I started working at CNN, and he really did take me under his wing. And we had a lot of fun together, and he put me on air all the time and made me feel smart and funny and awesome. Really helped my career out, gave me a lot of credibility. He and Christine Roman together on the old show Your Money, and, well, he just did about anything I'd ever asked him, including coming on today's show to talk about his new book. It's called Small Acts of Courage, A Legacy of Endurance and the Fight for Democracy. And the blurbs, obviously, Velshi knows everybody as the award-winning anchor of Velshi on MSNBC. I know many of you are big fans of his work there, as am I. But, I mean, look at the blurbs in the back of this book. Timothy Snyder, Joanne Reed, Jelani Cobb, Michael Ludick, the former conservative judge from the U.S. Appeals Court, Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman, writes, this book reinforces what I already knew from my personal experience. Our collective pursuit of justice is long, arduous, and often without immediate reward. But it's crucial nonetheless, as inspiring read for anyone committed to the principles of democratic integrity. And Timothy Snyder, the respected academic at Yale University, author of On Tyranny, writes, a book of wisdom and humility that offers a different sort of defense of democracy, grounded in one family's lived experience on 3 continents, and informed by the lesson that freedom and responsibility work together. Velshi in Small Acts of Courage. It's so good. Let me just read a little bit from the book jacket and then we'll jump into it. But more than a century ago, Velshi's great-grandfather sent his 7-year-old son to live at Tolstoy Farm, which I'd never heard of until reading Velshi's book, but it was Gandhi's ashram in South Africa. This difficult decision would change the trajectory of his family history forever. From childhood, Velshi's grandfather was imbued with an ethos of public service and social justice, and a belief in absolute equality among all people, ideals that his children carried forward as they escaped apartheid, emigrating to Kenya, and then ultimately to Canada and the United States. In Small Acts of Courage, Elie Velshi taps into 125 years of family history to advocate for social justice as a living, breathing experience, a way of life, more than an ideology. With rich detail and vivid prose, he relates the stories of regular people who made a lasting commitment to the fight for change, even when success seemed impossible. This heartfelt exploration of how we can breathe new life into the principles of pluralistic democracy is an urgent call to action. For progress to be possible, we must all do whatever we can to make a difference. I try to do that. I know you try to do that. And Elie Velshi certainly has always done that. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Velshi, let's do it.
Oh my God, Elie Velshi. He's got a book. He wrote a book, Small Acts of Courage. I didn't know you were writing a book, but I love your new book. Congratulations. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here, my friend. It's always good to talk to you. And there might be a couple things in the book that you don't yet know about me.
Oh my gosh, there's so much that I didn't know about you. I don't know exactly where to start. I guess the thing that I learned I don't know what you mean by when you say I can't swim. Does that mean if you were in deep water, you would drown? You could tread water.
I could tread water. Yeah, I live in Manhattan. I live across from the JCC, and there's a big pool there, and you can actually see it from my apartment. Some years ago, I enrolled in summer in adult group swim lessons, which was just an interesting little mix of people. It didn't really get me far, but I can actually tread water. But given that my great grandfather jumped off the front of a ship and swam to land, that's not something I can do.
We learn in this book how much better your forefathers were than you, and that you basically were born into so much more privilege than your father, grandfather, and great grandfather, who you trace back. And I'm not busting your chops. That's what you say.
My great-grandparents had been prosperous in India at one point. They were affected, as many Indians were, by the droughts of the 1800s and needed to leave the country to try and find fortune somewhere else. And they ended up in South Africa, which was hard to believe that was better than what they left, because South Africa was this deeply racist enterprise. And everyone in my family worked harder, was not born into basic things like the right to vote, basic things like living in an independent country with justice for all. And I was born into a family in a democracy. I was born in Kenya. We moved to Canada. I grew up in a democracy. I thought these battles were ancient family stories that were behind us, only to find out that, like my father, like my grandfather, my grandmother, like my great-grandparents, I too am in this struggle for democracy, just in a different way.
And you are leading in so many ways with your program and with all your reporting, and of course with this book. Why did you want to write this book? How would you describe it? I would describe it as part memoir, part history book, part just setting the table for, as you just said, where we are at now, and how that history, which you visit and learn about yourself in this book, we are revisiting in America today.
Yeah. And I think mostly I just like it to be a good read. So I lean into the memoir that almost feels a bit like a novel. But if you're looking for a message, there's one in there. And fundamentally, it is that no matter how frustrating or overwhelming it might seem that America and the world can be going in the wrong direction, you can do the things that are in front of you. And that's what my family's history is about. People who did the thing that was in front of them, that may have finished doing that thing and may have ended their lives not thinking that they had achieved the success that they had set out to achieve, or that anything had changed. And yet, beyond their lifespan, they influenced other people to change. So my grandfather died before I was born. All he wanted was slightly better rights for people who were not white in South Africa. He had no dream that his family would actually grow up in a democracy, that his son would become a member of parliament, that his daughter-in-law and granddaughter would both be candidates for major office, that his grandson would be me. They weren't thinking about that stuff. They were thinking about fixing the thing in front of them. And even that, it didn't look like it was working. So that's my point, is it's meant to be inspirational. It's meant to say, don't worry if you don't appear to be able to fix the world. You can fix something.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like when I'm reading it, especially at the end, when you talk about what it all means, it's very personal to the reader, saying someone like me, obviously, who is desperate to make a difference every day, to contribute, to fight, to be a part of a movement, of something. If you do a little thing, you might not win. You might not see the promised land, the end, but you're giving something, hopefully, if you have kids, to your kids. That's right. They'll get more. There'll be more in the fight. Eventually, it will come to fruition, as it has for your dad, for you, for your sister, right?
And hopefully for our kids and those who come after us, who can look back at the early 2020s and say they were fighting for democracy. It was, believe it or not, American democracy was imperiled for a little while. Believe it or not, Ukraine was almost taken over by Russia. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, and you don't know what changes you can make, but you might only be making change by influencing people, by giving them a way of thinking about it, by looking at you and being a role model and saying, hey, that's what Pete's doing. So I think it's more important than we think. As things become more overwhelming, and they do. Look, I work in the news business. I talk to people who watch me who say, I can't take it. I can't listen to all this stuff. I'm worried about the future of our country. Or conversely, people who tune it out, Pete, because it's too much to follow. We don't have those options, right? I was born into citizenship as a series of rights. And over the last several years, I have learned that citizenship is equally a series of responsibilities. And our responsibilities are to uphold our democracy, to uphold one another, and to recognize that if things aren't fair for all of us, then they're not fair for any of us. We don't enjoy democracy unless everyone enjoys democracy. So this is our fight. But I'm trying to present that in a way that is very easy to digest.
It's so good. It's so easy to digest. I couldn't put the book down. I'm really enjoying it. It's a different read for me than probably most people, because you and I have known each other for such a long time, and we've been, I think, good friends and mutual respect, and we've been through some stuff together. And to see and learn all this stuff about you that I didn't know was that much more fascinating, including the fact that apparently you have more passports than Jason Bourne. Take us through.
It's allowed. When I wrote that, I was thinking to myself, is that legal? Can I say that? But I do, yeah.
Take us through your timeline. Born in Kenya and moved to Canada, and then obviously to the U.S.
Yep. So my family is from India and then South Africa, but I didn't show up on the scene until they were in their third country, in Kenya. So I was born, but I left at the age of 1 and hence didn't have Kenyan citizenship. I got Canadian citizenship very quickly. I had a Canadian passport. And then after apartheid ended, they gave my family South African citizenship because they didn't enjoy those benefits as non-whites in South Africa. So I got a South African passport. Then Kenya decided that it wasn't going to be grumpy about people having other citizenship. So if you were born there, you could have your citizenship there too. So I thought that'd be fun. Why not? And that left only India, which I wasn't looking for. But back in the day, it's gotten easier now. But back in the day, if you needed to travel to India, as I did for business from time to time, very hard to get a visa. So I was sitting with the consul general one day, and I said, why is it so hard to get a visa? And she said, you should get one of those overseas citizenship of India passports. And I said, I'm not looking for another citizenship. She said, but it'll make the visa process much easier. So I got that too. So I'm at 5 now.
And you
and America, by the way, obviously that's included in it.
So I was going to pick up on that. You come to the U.S., you're living and working in the U.S. at CNN with our former colleague, Ashley Banfield. You walk into her office and tell me a little bit about that discussion. She really scolded you.
Yeah, so she's Canadian as well. She had taken American citizenship, and she asked me, why haven't you done it? And the real answer was because it's forms and applications, and they needed information that I just didn't have any motivation to do. So I said to her, I don't.
And you didn't just quickly, and you didn't need to do it. Like you had a job. You had.
Correct. I had a green card. I worked for CNN. I didn't need it for anything. And so I joked with her. I said, I can avoid jury duty. And she just lit into me. She said, that's a responsibility of citizenship. You don't get to just enjoy the fruits of it and not the responsibilities. I don't think she's a legal analyst, so I think she takes jury duty very seriously. But I'm not sure the point was just jury duty. It's that you live here. You are part of this society. You're in it. You have to be a full participant. And that might mean attending jury duty, but get your damn citizenship and pretend that you actually are part of this whole thing. And I came to terms with the fact that taking American citizenship did not mean denying my Canadian heritage, which has meant a lot to me and my upbringing. So I'm happily a citizen of both countries.
In reading the book, I realized that what your effort was here, and we could talk about why you wanted to do it, but to trace back your lineage. And it made me realize how comfortable and selfish I am in terms of I don't know much about my grandparents, much less my grandparents. And I think I've always defended that in that I don't need to. I've always thought about those 23andMe, me, or whatever the bullshit is. Who cares? I don't care what my DNA is. And everybody who does, don't get offended. I think it's great. Fine, for whatever reason. But in reading your book, it really made me curious about what efforts my grandparents put in, my great-grandparents put in, what they went through, because I do believe in interconnectedness and that we're all connected. And certainly we're connected and we're here literally because of our grandparents and great-grandparents. So tell people why it's so meaningful. I guess it's an easy and obvious question, but why was it so meaningful to you? Was it great-grandfather? Yeah. He hung out with Gandhi, for goodness sake.
Yeah. And my grandfather was Gandhi's youngest student. So there's two parts to this. First of all, there's a universality to the story. Whether or not my grandfather was Gandhi's student, everybody's grandparents have an interesting story, right? Everybody did something. Everybody left a place for a reason, and it's never as easy as it looks. Leaving your home for another country where in those days, all you had was letters and newspaper articles, you weren't really sure, right? Everything looked like the streets were paved in gold, but you didn't know. And when you get to a new place and you don't have friends and you can't speak the language and it's not an internet world back then, so that's a universal story. Everybody who's from this country, generally speaking, is from somewhere else. And we are all intrigued by what we can find out about our ancestors. The second part of this, though, is the story of immigration. It is the way of the world. It has always been the way of the world. It will continue to be the way of the world. We will need it in this country. We are desperate for it. In fact, the reason my parents got to Canada is because Canada realized in 1968 how desperate it was for immigrants and how was it going to compete with the United Kingdom at the time and the USA to get those immigrants. We are still the top destination for immigrants in the country, but we're doing a lot of work to wreck that, Pete. We're spreading the word that we're anti-immigrant and possibly racist. I don't believe that to be true in any case. I just don't believe most Americans see immigration that way. We certainly are not an economy that's anti-immigrant because we need these folks. Right. But I just want everybody to remember it was the same stuff back then. Those people came to countries where they were not welcomed for the color of their skin. They were told they don't speak the language. They don't understand the culture. They're going to wreck the place. They were probably thought to commit more crimes than the native-born population. Not true then, not true here in America either. So it's a little bit of a treatise both to immigration and the way Canada looks at these things that's a little bit differently than the U.S., right? I was at an event in Toronto for the public library the other day, and they were raising money for all the ways in which they could welcome new arrivals to Toronto. Literally, the public library, financial services, financial training, housing services, education training, language services. Canada's sitting there and everybody's taking it on themselves to say, a lot of immigrants, we need all these immigrants. How do we make them feel at home so that they can become like my family did? I want America to think that way before we lose the edge that we've got right now.
Yeah. When we think about Canada, and we don't know much, most of us don't, and we know it's about as many people as there are in California alone, like 30 million or something.
Yeah.
And then, but at the same time, I don't know how much more land or more. The point is, you have this really funny, not anecdote, you're talking about a cartoon that you saw years ago describing the anti-immigrant feelings in Canada. What I'm trying to say is, even though Canada doesn't have as many people, it does have a lot of land. It still has, as every country does, an anti-xenophobia, if you will. Tell us about that cartoon.
So it was very young, and my dad was showing it to me. It was in the newspaper, and it was a husband and wife on the porch of their farmhouse in, I think it was Saskatchewan or something like that, where there's nothing but land, and they're looking out, and literally it's their farmhouse, and they're looking out on nothing but land. And the subtext about immigration is, where will we put them all? The cartoonist was making fun of the idea that we have nothing but land for these people. In fact, Canada has the largest diaspora of Ukrainians anywhere in the world because Canada has the same kind of wheat that they grow in Ukraine. And they didn't have people to farm it. And it's unpleasant to live in Manitoba and Saskatchewan in the winter. And these Ukrainians are like, hey, we got this. We know how to do it. They came, they worked hard. They did something that was necessary. And yes, we had the space for them. And yes, we still have space. Now, what we don't have, Pete, anywhere in the world, in London, in Vancouver, in New York, in San Francisco, is adequate housing. But for most of the last 150 years, we haven't had adequate housing, irrespective of immigration. We just don't build enough housing, and certainly not enough affordable housing. That somebody tweeted the other day and told me these immigrants are causing a housing crisis. No, we have a housing crisis. We've always had a housing crisis. No. Immigrants are not causing it. We have an infrastructure problem that we need to fix. So even Canada's got that. Even Toronto and Vancouver struggle with prices that go up, rental prices and property prices that go up because people come in from other parts of the world. That's the normal course of things. Our job as a society is to say we need a lot of immigrants, which means we need a lot of housing. We need proper roads. We need proper public transportation. We need proper services. We need financial services. We need to teach people English. But that's us. We provide the infrastructure. These beautiful people come here and provide their labor and our future.
Said, I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm anti-migrant is the joke I like to make, because there's a big difference between what it means to be immigrating, become a migrant or a refugee or any number of other statuses. And we're only going to see more migration, people being forced out of where they live. I think we think of that word and we think of flocks of geese or tribal people moving as the seasons move or as the buffalo roam, following them along. But the truth is people are going to come not only to the U.S., but other countries all over as a result, obviously, of climate and as well as anybody, war, because you've reported so much from Ukraine.
Yeah. Climate, war, and economics. That's it. Those are the three reasons. By the way, historically, Pete, they're the three reasons everybody's ever moved anywhere anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it wasn't a full-on climate change, but it was drought in my grandparents left India because of drought. And by the way, because when the British colonized India, India was almost a quarter of the world's GDP. It was a massive economy. And then it shrunk down to about 2% under colonialization because the Brits took all the stuff of value, made it in Britain and sold it back. So when drought hit India, it was unable to sustain itself, which is why everybody left. That's why there's an Indian diaspora. That's why in any major city you go to, there's an Indian community. That's why the West Indies has Indian communities in Jamaica and Trinidad and places like that. But everybody always left for a better life, a safer life, a better economic life, or food or education. It's the same stuff. And we have to think about it that way. But some people in this country have taken to using derogatory terms about migrants, or just people who move. An immigrant, a migrant, as you said, a refugee, an asylum seeker. They are all coming for different reasons, but they are what we built this country on. And you can have beef about our policies. You can have beef about whether or not we should have a more solid door on the southern border. This is all legitimate conversation, but we are dehumanizing them. And we have been doing this for not just the last decade. Both political parties have not done a good job of this. I argue for the fact that immigration in this country should be handled by something called the Department of Immigration, or something that understands the economic imperative of immigrants. Ours is under the Department of Homeland Security. The whole concept of immigration is shrouded in a context of threat in America. We have to get out of that. Immigrants are not a threat. They are going to save our economy.
In the last 20 years, it hasn't been both parties, to say that, to be fair, right?
You're right. Historically, both parties have not been as aggressive about creating a proper streamline for immigration into the United States. In the last 10 years, the Republican Party, which, by the way, used to understand in places like Texas and Florida the economic imperative of immigration to this day, decided that they would lean into this anti-immigrant stuff. And it predated Donald Trump. He just tapped into a rich vein. My old colleague Lou Dobbs, our old colleague at CNN, leaned into this very heavily. It's just wrong. It's just economically wrong. You can not like immigrants if you want. I don't know why you live in America then, or certainly not in an American city. That's your choice. But it's wrong to suggest that it's economically bad for us, that it lowers wages or does something bad for us. Yes, we've got housing crisis. Yes, we've got traffic and transportation crises. Fix those.
This made me laugh thinking about Lou Dobbs. He was such a nice guy off air. He's really kind, and I always liked him. But I got into a real argument with him about immigration in the green room one time. This is now at Fox News, and I just remember him like yelling, "My wife is Mexican," or something like that to me. And I just yelled back, "You own a horse farm, sir." Like, he was so wealthy. He had like a horse farm in New Jersey, but it was always I'm friends with the blank. Right. We always love the people of the ethnicities that we know personally, and then we use it to defend how open-minded we are. Like, I'm not sexist. I married a woman.
Yeah.
Anyway, you go into the history. Let's do it. Let's look at some of it. Man, I learned so much about South Africa and Kenya specifically, and India, that I didn't know, in Islam. And then I learned about your weird, somewhat sad-sounding childhood in Canada, where you couldn't play hockey and you didn't get to eat ham sandwiches. We'll get to that because that's fun. You turned into a badass, though. At some point, you rode a motorcycle across. Yeah. You were riding a motor. I've always thought you were a pretty cool guy. So I love the idea that you weren't when you were a little Canadian brown boy who couldn't play hockey. But let's talk about your grandparents. Let's talk about, I guess, probably you just mentioned India, but talk to me about South Africa and how your family ended up there first. I think that was before Kenya, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So when you were leaving India in the 1800s because of these droughts, you went where the boats took you. If you were on the east coast of India, you went to Hong Kong or Malaysia or places like that. If you were on the west coast of India, which my parents were in Gujarat, you went to Bombay and you got on the boats that left from there. And they went, generally speaking, to Africa. My great-grandparents went to South Africa, where my grandparents on both sides were born. And they tried to just eke out a living. I always thought they were business people. What I didn't realize until I researched the book is that their business was that they bought hand carts, like wheelbarrows, basically. And one would fill it with vegetables and one would fill it with household goods and things like that. And they'd go door to door and sell that stuff. And eventually they consolidated it all and they became slightly more prosperous. They had a gas station and they bought a bakery and things like that in Pretoria. It's like a little ghetto. They all lived 1 square mile sort of thing. And then there were Gujaratis from this part of India called Gujarat. And they had a Gujarati accountant who did their books. That accountant also did some work for this new lawyer who had come to South Africa named Mohandas Gandhi, also a Gujarati. So that's how my great-grandfather and Gandhi got to know each other. And when Gandhi would come to Pretoria, he was living in Johannesburg. When he would come to Pretoria, that's where the government was for his negotiations with the people who in the government. My great-grandfather would supply him with a horse-drawn wagon, because he was one of the only people in town who had one. It was called a dray. And they just became friends. He would stay at my great-grandfather's house, and that was it. There was nothing. I don't think they talked much politics. And then Gandhi asked my great-grandfather, would he allow his son, my grandfather, to attend his ashram that he was building. He was building a commune. My grandfather was 7 years old at the time, and my great-grandfather's only response to Gandhi was that we're Muslims, you're Hindu. How can I send my son to live at your residential school? And Gandhi says, I will learn your religion to teach it to him, which he did. So my grandfather learned Islam from a devout Hindu, from Mahatma Gandhi.
That is crazy. I learned about Judaism from my father, and he didn't know anything about it. So I didn't learn much, but not at all similar. Actually, I don't think my dad ever even mentioned the word. So how do you get to Kenya?
So Gandhi leaves South Africa eventually, and my grandfather sort of takes what he learned on this farm. He was there for 3 years as a boy and tried to work that into his daily life, fighting the little injustices. And as they got more prosperous, they started fighting greater injustices. So my dad's brother went off to train as a guerrilla and went to all the communist capitals to learn how to fight off apartheid. And slowly but surely, the government was getting annoyed by my parents' involvement in apartheid and forced them out of business. It's a good story in the book, but they needed to go somewhere. They were essentially stateless in their own country, which is what it was like to not be white in South Africa. You didn't enjoy basic rights. So they were off to Kenya. My dad had 2 sisters who had married husbands who were in Kenya. So we had some roots there, and they were going to try and replicate their lives in Kenya. And that's what they did. They moved to Kenya before it was an independent country, while it was still a colony. They got to see for the first time in their lives the birth of a country, the birth of a democracy. They got to participate and vote in their first election. And actually, life was pretty good in Kenya. They were there for 10 years until I was born. Apparently, I wrecked the whole thing.
What happened? How did you wreck the whole thing?
I didn't actually wreck it. One of the things that happened in Africa where Indians were, Indians were in all of these countries, and in some cases they were really helpful to the cause, as Gandhi was and others. In other cases, they weren't. They were somewhere between the native black people and the colonizing white people, and many of them wanted to be closer up to the white people and farther from the black people. And so when black nationalism came to Africa, as it should have in the days when colonialism was ending, there was a sense that there were slogans that said things like Africa for Africans. And India, meanwhile, had told these Indians, you're not Indians. You haven't been here for a long time, so you're not coming back to India. So Indians weren't sure what their place was in African society, and it was starting to get hostile. And that culminated in the early 70s in Uganda with Idi Amin expelling all of the Asians from Uganda. So it felt like that was going to move to Kenya as well. So my parents moved to Canada, where they were finally able to realize democracy in its fullest form.
It's fair to say the Indian diaspora is as large as any other ethnicity. It's a very populated country, but I think China and India, I feel like your people are everywhere.
Everywhere, literally, yeah, and for different reasons. And you'll run into Chinese business people or laborers around the world, same as India. In India, it was both laborers. They were there brought in by the British to lay the railways, generally speaking, or work the mines or things like that. Or they were small business people, like my grandparents and great-grandparents were, like small business people. They would have a shop. The typical word for an Indian is dukkawala, somebody who owns a dukka, which is a shop. They're shopkeepers, which created some of the antagonism with the native African groups, because while the British colonials and European businesses controlled economic activity in Africa, it's not what the person from the village saw. They saw the shop run by an Indian, right? Generally, when you're feeling displaced in life, you mostly look at whoever's the one who looks like they're holding up your advancement, the next person up the rung on the ladder. And that was in many cases the Indians, who were professionals or shopkeepers. And that's what made, and look, a lot of Indians stayed in Africa to this day and have made it work. Durban in South Africa remains the biggest population of Indians anywhere outside of India to this day. Oh. So a lot of people did stay and make it work. But my parents were on such a quest for a fully participatory democracy, and that's how they ended up in Canada.
And then I think Canada is next.
Yes.
So what happened? How did
we get to Canada? We get very involved in politics right off the top.
Your mom and dad moved to Canada. You and your sister are born already?
I'm 1.5 when we get there.
You're only 1.5. Okay.
Yeah, I was a little baby. We get to Canada. My mother had worked
as a baby. Did you look exactly what you look like now?
There. My family gets there. My mother had worked for KLM as a reservation agent in South Africa. So in Kenya. So they had other than being business people, they had no particular skill. So they opened a travel agency and they worked really hard. But in all their spare time, they were involved in community activities and politics. They wanted to live and breathe and eat politics. And by the way, that meant watching the national news every night on TV, which is how I got into the news, because news was really important in my house, because you couldn't understand the world and politics if you didn't consume news. And they tried out all the political parties. They found themselves to be liberals and a party that supported workers, but not to the exclusion of business, and was business friendly, but not to the exclusion of workers' rights. That was fundamentally what it was back in the day.
Oh, interesting.
And by the time I was 11 years old, 1981, my dad called a bunch of friends together. I remember sitting in the living room. I was on the floor, and he said he was going to run for office. And they thought that was the craziest thing ever. Canada at the time was provincial. It was not a place where a guy like my dad, a new immigrant, little brown man, was going to run for office. But he did. He ran for office. He ran in a constituency as a liberal that had been conservative for 42 years. The incumbent was the health minister. Now, in Canada, the health minister is like the attorney general, because it's a universal health care nation. And in those places, the health minister is a very important person. So he's running against the most solid guy out of 100 seats that were up for election. So we get in the car on election night. We'd gone home to change. I'm 11 years old. I'm sitting in the car with my dad. We put the radio on. It's 8:00, and they announce the polls are closed across the province. Too early to tell what the results will be, except for in this one constituency, which my dad was running in, where they were able to say that the incumbent conservative had been reelected, because it was such a certainty that would happen. Nobody even needed to see a vote. I couldn't believe it. I'm sitting in the car, and I look at my dad. I can't believe we lost. And he says, "Of course we lost." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "We were always going to lose." And I said, "Well, why did we run if we were going to lose?" And he says, "Because you can." because I was able to put my ideas out there and people could vote for me, and fewer people voted for me than voted for the other guy. And tomorrow everything goes on the same as it used to be. Nobody gets arrested. Nobody goes to jail. And life goes on. And we arrive at the campaign office. Everybody claps for my dad. I'm wondering what they're clapping for because we just lost the election. Yeah. But he had done what they wanted him to do. He went into the back room. He phoned the guy who won the election, had a charming conversation for a minute. He conceded the election. There was no challenging it and audits and all that kind of stuff. And we went on. And that's where I learned about politics. And the funny part is people who've read the book or know my family say, but the story is that he ran again and he won and he became the first. But that wasn't as important to me as when he lost. When he lost is when I learned what politics was about and why you run for office and how you lose and what you do. When he won, we just got more votes than the other guy.
Tell me just a little bit more about your boyhood in Canada, because you go into that and it's, like I said, it's a little bit heartbreaking thinking about how my friend was bullied. But you called yourself husky. You were a fat boy because you ate donuts.
Yeah. I'm very glad there wasn't social media when I was growing up, because I really would have felt badly about myself and all the things I wasn't getting invited to. But look, it wasn't a bad childhood by any means. I just wasn't engaged in the things that somebody like me would have been engaged in as a child. Now, for instance, every immigrant now plays hockey and they do the same things. And unlike me, where I was embarrassed to take my sort of Indian leftover foods to school for lunch while everybody was having ham and cheese sandwiches, now people go into school with their fully ethnic names and make sure everybody else can pronounce them. They go in with their food or they don't, right? It's everybody's choice as to what you want to do. You don't have to do things to fit in today the way I had to. But I don't have regrets about it. I had a great childhood. Canada was a great and welcoming place. I just didn't do some of the things that were as Canadian as I perhaps would have liked to, but turned out okay.
Your dad seems like a real good guy. He's always supporting other people, and you would get donuts delivered and you would apparently be allowed to eat as many as you want. And then we learned that you can freeze donuts. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I didn't understand why we got 24 donuts every Saturday morning. Because you don't question some things, Pete. If somebody shows up with 24 hot donuts at your place every Saturday morning, which we can't eat, my mother's giving donuts up and down the street, then we're freezing them and you put them in the microwave. It's fantastic. I didn't know until much later that the man bringing us the donuts owned a donut shop. And as an added service, he would come and deliver donuts to people. You paid him for it. He was a refugee from Uganda. And we got our groceries the same way. Back before there were grocery delivery services, we'd open the door and there'd be groceries in bags. A man would go, he would buy groceries. He would use the public transit system, the buses, to come and give us our groceries. Again, my parents were supporting these refugees who had no other way of doing it. Both of those families, by the way, turned out to be very successful because that's what happens. You come as a refugee to these countries. Right. You know you have nowhere to look back on. You know this is your future and your children's future. You work hard and it tends to work. And by the way, you try not to when you get deported.
Yeah, that man was Arthur Bezos, Jeff's dad.
Similar to that, right? But that's the thing. We were, and that's, I didn't realize this was all part of the ethos. And I think about it today because we do the same thing. We just don't know them. We get our food delivered by people who are also have come here from somewhere else and maybe don't speak the language. We do that. So I remember that when it's time to tip. And I don't think of immigration as an abstraction, right? I think of all these people around me and I wonder what my life would be like here in Manhattan if those people didn't choose to come here and be among me and my neighbors. And I wonder what their grandchildren will write about them one day. So it's a really, to me, that's the thing we have to think about, that we are all, I'm an optimistic guy generally, Pete. The last few years has challenged me, but I am an optimistic guy. And those stories reminded me that when you do right by others, things do work out.
I remember when we met, I was super curious about this guy. Like, how did he get here? You were I believe the chief business correspondent for CNN. And the more I got to know you, the more I got to know, I think, your personal opinions and proclivities and ideas, but they didn't come out on air, certainly not at CNN, not until much later. And we can talk about that evolution of yours. But didn't you go to business school and want to go into business? How did you end up in journalism and media?
Funny enough, I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm not sure I wanted to be a lawyer, but that was what I was going to do. And as I was in school, in college, I started to get more interested in activism and news and things like that. And I didn't want to go to law school in the end. I decided I wanted to write, but I couldn't get a job at a newspaper. And ultimately, I did get an internship at CNN. It took me 10 years after my internship to get back to CNN as an employee. My parents were not thrilled by that. They're pretty forward looking, but they're still Indian parents who was like, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, and a couple other things you can do. But this journalist thing doesn't really does it pay? And are you going to make your rent and all that? So I didn't study business. I became a business journalist because my family had been in business. I figured I'd know something about it. And at the time that I came of age, the business journalism was growing. Right. CNBC was around. Bloomberg was around. So Canada wanted to launch a similar station like that had a screen that had stock tickers and all that kind of stuff. And I said, look, I don't really know much about business. I'm familiar with it through my parents, but not trading in stocks. And they said, we'll give you a really good producer and an earpiece. You do what the producer tells you. And that's how I got started. I really followed other people's scripts and instructions. And then I came to love it. I came to really enjoy the world of business. And boy, had I stuck with that, Pete, what a simple life I'd have. Now I'm in it. Now I'm in all this political.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you evolved from the anchor of CNN's Your Money, chief business correspondent, to Al Jazeera. I remember that time for you. And then obviously doing the best work of your career, I think you would agree, at MSNBC, according to all of your viewers, I'm guessing. And that's certainly how I feel. Do you have the book on you?
Hold on. It's within reach. So let me.
Yeah, go ahead and get it. All
right. What would you like me to read?
At the end, page 274, I wanted to end our conversation with that. If you start at what is the biggest risk right at the top and end with the bottom of the page, they always do, and I can edit that, whatever. Would you mind?
Yeah, I'd love that.
I really love this, and I think it's a great way to, recap or just look ahead.
What is the biggest risk that I can take? And am I taking it? What is the most revolutionary thing that I can do? And am I doing it? Will I pass on to my children, Erica and Eli, the same inheritance of good choices and positive actions that was passed on to me? I don't think I'll ever be called on to take a blind leap into the Indian Ocean, which becomes a huge relief since I still don't know how to swim. But for me, as a journalist, the most radical and revolutionary thing I can do is simply to use the platform that I'm so incredibly lucky to have. I can resolve to make journalism and the national dialogue better than they have been. I can promise to never again let go of my aspiration to be Webb Miller on that phone outside the Darasan Salt Works, using my camera to bear witness to injustice and using my microphone to hold power to account. But you don't have to be a television journalist to make a difference in this world. You don't have to be Mohandas Gandhi or Nelson Mandela or Pierre Trudeau or Barack Obama to do it either. You can be a refugee on a boat. You can be an immigrant shopkeeper struggling to get by. You can be a working parent with barely 5 minutes to spare at the end of the week. All you have to do is make the greatest contribution you can make, given what you have at that moment. Maybe it's running for local office, or maybe it's helping drive people to the polls. Maybe it's volunteering at the library. It can be anything. Your efforts may feel like a drop in the ocean. It may feel like change is impossible. Your actions may not even bear fruit until your children, your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren come of age. But somehow, somewhere, your choices will leave their mark. They always do.
Man. So good. The whole book is so good. Everybody should go buy it. But before you go, I just want to say to you, we met in 2010, and you role modeled how to behave in the TV news business to me, because you are an on-air person. Everywhere you went in the building, in the hallways, and even then on the streets, people recognized you. They knew who you were. But you treat then and now everybody the same, no matter who they are, whether they're the executive above you or the, quote, maintenance person, quote, below you. You treated me that way. Nobody else did. I stepped in that CNN, which is very serious, hard news, as a comedian trying to evolve like you had, apparently. And you treated me like one of your own with respect. And it made me feel smart. It made me feel like I had something to say and it was worth hearing. And everybody that's ever worked with you knows that about you. That's who you are. That's how you treat people. And this book colored and informed me as to why my friend is the way he is, because of his parents and his grandparents and everything else. So I wanted to say that, and thank you for joining me over these years and for being my friend, and congratulations on this book. It's so important, and your kids will value it as will theirs and mine. Thank you, my friend.
And to you, my friend, I've appreciated our long friendship, and may we have many more years of it.
All right, buddy.
There he goes, Ali Velshi. Everybody, go buy the book, Small Acts of Courage. Let him know that you heard him here. Go tweet him, and that would be great. By the way, yesterday I got a email from my friend Cindy, who's a longtime listener, who made a really good point that not everybody's on social media, and she'd love to thank my guests more often, but sometimes she has to go and find their email. So what I'm going to start doing is asking my guests if you can email them, because I absolutely, if that's easier and more personal, they'll appreciate it. I don't think anybody's going to not give their email out to listeners. So, yeah, I think it's really good. Great suggestion, Cindy, and I really appreciate you making it. So I'll try to get more people's emails if they're available. There you go. All right. I love you, listeners, so much. You bumblebees here at the end that listen all the way to the end. So special to me. I hope you appreciate it today, and looking forward to sharing more with you tomorrow. I was actually interviewing Emily Atkin of Heated.world, the amazing climate crisis independent reporter, and something happened on the internet. It just kicked out about 15 minutes into our interview, but hopefully I can finish that conversation with her today. I'm also going to be talking with the showrunner and screenwriter of the Apple TV show Manhunt, about John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, and how he was on the run for 11 days. Monica Belinsky is going to join me for the first time, and I reached out to her just based on watching that show. I don't think I've really ever done that. Also, if I'm being honest, it's kind of what my daughter wants to do, so I thought it would be interesting to ask her a few questions about her career and what it's like to be a woman in that role, because there really aren't a lot of female showrunners and head writers, etc. like that. So she'll be my guest tomorrow. I'm looking to talk to David Rothkopf. I'm also going to be talking to Barry Ritholtz this week. What else can I tell you? I try to get a hold of Mara and Christian and some of our favorite regulars as well. Ophira, I haven't talked to since Podjam either. I'll get them back on ASAP. Who else would you like to hear on the program? Let me know. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. This was a rather long closing, but I think it was all worth it. Love you guys. John Carroll taking us out.
I think you're driving wheels in a leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. See the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.